بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اتبع هداه واقتفى أثره إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد فالسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Peace and blessings be upon you all. Today inshallah we're going to continue our explanation of Durratul Bayan fi Usul al-Iman. The author described the science of Tawheed, saying, the science of Tawheed is the origin of all other sciences. It is an independent and irreplaceable field of Islamic knowledge. We previously mentioned the science of Tawheed, what it means. We looked at the definition of these different meanings of Tawheed and the many different words that are given to, the many different names that are given to this science. These words that are given to different sciences, fields of knowledge, Tawheed, Fiqh, Aqidah, science, math, have different relationships with each other. They're either identical, meaning that they work similar to how synonyms work, two names for the same thing, such as calling the science of Tawheed, Tawheed or Aqidah, for example. Or they're different, completely different, meaning that they are different fields of knowledge, such as English and math, or Aqidah and fiqh, you might say. Even though aqidah and fiqh is more like the third type of difference, you could say. Okay, you may find that one field of knowledge and another field of knowledge have some common ground, some area or some aspects of knowledge that are discussed in both. Fiqh and aqidah might be considered of this type more than the previous one. And a good example would be, you could say, Tawheed and Tafsir, for example. The fourth type of difference is when one field of knowledge is part of another field of knowledge. For example, Fiqh and Fara'id, or inheritance, or mathematics and algebra. So a field of knowledge is part of another field of knowledge. We go back to the third type, which is having common ground between them, while there are still some differences between the different fields of knowledge. This is what most Islamic fields of knowledge have, you could say, with Tawheed. Seeing as this science studies Allah Azza wa Jal, His oneness and the basis of religion, it is the most important aspect or type of Islamic knowledge, and all other fields of knowledge are secondary to it. All other aspects of Islam, after all, come after believing in Tawheed, in the Shahada, in the creed of Islam. As-Safarini said, know that all knowledge is an offshoot of Tawheed. Abu Hanifa called this knowledge al-Fiqh al-Akbar, or the greatest fiqh. The fact that the origin of these fields of knowledge, the Islamic fields of knowledge, is the Quran and the Sunnah, is one of the explanations of the phrase that the author said, which is that it is the origin of all Islamic fields of knowledge. Another possible meaning of this phrase is that Tawheed and other fields of knowledge have much common ground, or ideas and concepts that are studied in each of these different fields of knowledge. For example, if one was to look at the field of Tawheed and Tafsir, they would find that both these fields of knowledge study the ayat of Allah's names and attributes. The meanings of these ayat, of these words, are studied in fiqh, in Tafsir and in Aqidah, and also in Arabic linguistic studies. Some scholars say that this concept of these different fields of knowledge studying the same matters is what's meant by Tawheed being the origin of all fields of knowledge. Another thing worth mentioning here is that Tawheed is the most important field of knowledge for many reasons, one of which is the fact that it has a very strong connection to the Quran and the Sunnah, to Islamic texts. For Islamic texts either affirm Tawheed in its informative nature, talking about Allah by describing Him with His beautiful names and attributes. If not, it looks at the talabi nature of Tawheed, which means calling people to worshipping Him alone. So either informing about His names and attributes, describing Him, or looking at worship and worshipping Allah alone. If not, it looks at the rights the rulings and the necessitations of Tawheed, such as what is halal and haram. If not, it either looks at the reward of those who have Tawheed or the punishment of those who do not have Tawheed. The author, after mentioning that Tawheed is the most important of all fields of knowledge, said, learning the science of Tawheed can be fard ayn and it can be fard kifaya. He said, studying Tawheed is fard ayn in the aspects of Tawheed that must be understood for a believer to have sound aqidah or creed. The general evidence used to prove this creed or this aqidah must also be known. These aspects of Tawheed all mukallafeen are asked about on the Day of Judgment. The rest of Tawheed is fard kifaya. Matters such as the details of Tawheed and the specific evidence and reasoning behind many aspects of Tawheed, the ability to convince others of the correct understanding of Tawheed and how to respond to the opinions of others is also fard kifaya. This is a bit of a long paragraph, so we'll explain it in simpler words, you could say. So we're looking at the science of Tawheed. Must we study Tawheed? What is the ruling of studying Tawheed? The author said that generally this Tawheed is fard kifaya. Rulings related to having halal and haram are called al-ahkam al-taklifiyah. They're either haram or wajib or makruh or mustahab or mubah. These kind of rulings, being haram or wajib, are directed to people who are mukallafeen or who are pubertic, sane adults. These rulings look at the Islamic connection between the actions of a person and that person. So you praying, is it mandatory, is it optional? That's what's looked at in al-ahkam al-taklifiyah, whether these actions are acceptable or not. So generally we said it's fard ayn. What does fard ayn mean? Fard ayn means it's mandatory upon a community in its entirety. Most scholars say that fard and wajib have the same meaning. The Hanafis differ, obviously, claiming that fard is what was affirmed by unquestionable evidence or adilla qat'iyya, and that one must perform it, and he who denies it has left Islam. Anyway, we're going to look at fard and wajib as if they are the same. Fard has two types, fard kifaya and fard ayn. Fard kifaya is a mandatory act that everyone who is legally, in Islamic terms, legally accountable or mukallaf must do. Every single person. No one's exempted from doing it. An example would be the 5 daily prayers. Fard kifaya is a duty that is directed towards the whole society. No specific person is required to do this actual act, but the community in its entirety are required to fulfill this command. If enough people do it in a community, then no one is considered to have sinned. If not, then everyone generally is considered to have sinned. An example would be ordaining what is good and forbidding what is evil. If enough people do it, no one sins. If no one does it or not enough people do it, then those who leave it are considered to have sinned. Now we know what fard ayn and fard kifaya means. Let's look at Tawheed. Some aspects of Tawheed are fard ayn, some are fard kifaya. This actually applies to most fields of Islamic knowledge. You have mandatory aspects and aspects that aren't mandatory upon every single person. So what you need to know to pray, for example, or to have the correct aqidah is mandatory upon every person. Everyone must know how to pray, how to fast, and must know what they are meant to believe in. Not learning these aspects of Islam make you sinful. Ibn Abdullah said, the scholars have made ijma' that some aspects of knowledge are fard ayn upon each and every person, while others are fard kifaya. If enough people do it, meaning the fard kifaya, in any particular land, the mandatory nature of that knowledge is removed from the people of that land. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, studying Islamic knowledge is generally fard kifaya, except when it's fard ayn. such as for people having to study what one must, what one has been commanded to do and what he has been forbidden from doing. So generally it's Fard Kifaya. Fard Ayn on the matters that you must know. Okay, what's Fard Ayn? What's called Al-Iman Al-Ijmali, or the general Iman is mandatory upon all people. This means that this general Iman is described as being the Iman of a person who believes but can't prove with detailed evidence what he believes in, giving evidence to back it, nor can he refute the saying of other people. This broad concept is something that all Muslims must have, and includes the general hadith that back it. For example, the pillars of Islam. Matters such as the names of individual prophets of Allah and the books of those prophets, and the detailed events of Day of Judgment are not necessarily mandatory for all people to know. This general type of Iman, if someone comes believing in it, knowing his prophet, that they were prophets, believing in the general books of Allah, believing in the pillars of Iman, the general concepts, then he has done what he must do and he is not sinful, insha'Allah ta'ala. On the condition, obviously, that enough people perform the mandatory part of studying Aqidah and teaching it. Beyond that, we have Fard Kifaya, which is the responsibility of the scholars and those who specialize in Aqidah to study all the nitty-gritty and the details of this great field of knowledge, and to be able to refute the sayings of the evil people in regards to Aqidah. If we were to look at this Aqidah, we could say that one must believe in the Day of Judgment, believe in his Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. One must also be fully convinced that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad ﷺ is his final messenger. The books of Allah he must believe in general, doesn't have to know all the detailed books. The angels of Allah and the actions that Allah described in the Quran that they do, matters such as the last day in general and Al-Qadr or predestiny, are some of the most important, if not all the most important aspects of Al-Iman Al-Ijmali. If you believe in those things and the general concepts of Islam, you have done your individual duty. If you can specialize in studying Islam, which is what this course aims at doing, then inshallah you will also have done the Fard Kifaya. We ask Allah to reward us all and to bless us with beneficial knowledge. Allahumma ameen wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'een wa man tabi'a hudahum ila yawm ad-din. Wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.